World of Warfare presents Operation Aphrodite. As World War II neared its final year of conflict in Europe, despite their overwhelming capacity to outproduce Germany in terms of war weapons, the United States had one glaring problem they could not seem to overcome. While their ally Great Britain had managed to develop enormous bombs that could incapacitate concrete-reinforced U-boat pens and bunkers along the Atlantic Wall, America remained incapable of delivering such enormous and destructive bombs.
The RAF's 22,000-pound bomb is 25 feet long and perfectly streamlined to give it maximum penetration power. Bombing up was quite an operation in itself, and special cranes and trolleys were brought into service to get the world's biggest bomb aboard the world's finest bomber. Lancasters had been specially modified to carry these 22,000-pounders. Aircraft, in fact, have always been the limiting factor in the size of bombs. In the last war, a 20-pound bomb was considered pretty grim. Early in this war, a 1,000-pounder was regarded with awe. In March 1945, the RAF produced the 10-tonner, the Grand Slam. On the 15th of March, Lancasters used them to attack the viaduct at Arnsberg, one of the main exits from the Ruhr. Any moment now.
Combined with Germany's advances in V-weapons that rained death and destruction upon England and Northwest Europe, Allied war leaders felt a new urgency to destroy V-weapon launch sites and manufacturing facilities, particularly V-1 flying bomb shelters that resisted damage caused by conventional Allied bombing campaigns.
Almost 2,000 flying bombs fell victim to Allied fighter planes. Of the 8,000 bombs launched, 2,300 penetrated British defenses, most of them falling in the London vicinity. The propulsion roar of the flying bomb was easily identified and gave warning of the approaching blast. New deep shelters built for this emergency were put to use and saved the lives of thousands of people. Hundreds of homes, hospitals, and public buildings were hit. They fell in crowded streets during rush traffic hours.
Allied urgency intensified yet again when the Germans developed V-2 ballistic missile technology, which was even more alarming due to the fact that there was no way to shoot them down once they were airborne. To address the rising menace, Allied war leaders launched Operation Crossbow with the objective of destroying all permanent V-weapon launch sites, as well as their manufacturing plants and transportation networks. At first by utilizing Great Britain's enormous earthquake bombs, but then by an even more audacious campaign. Britain's earthquake bomb technology was first developed in their 12,000-pound Tallboy bomb, which carried 5 tons of explosives and could only be carried aloft by modified British Avro Lancaster heavy bombers. On June 24th of 1944, Tallboys successfully damaged the V-2 missile assembly site at Le Capole, France, where the British also employed their even larger Grand Slam earthquake bomb, which weighed in at 22,000 pounds and carried 6.5 tons of Torpex, the same explosive used in Allied torpedoes. the resulting destruction at Lake Apol at last managed to undermine the facility's foundations, causing severe structural failures that at least temporarily shut down the Germans' ability to launch V-2s from the site. While the Allies were thrilled with the results, the Americans were unable to employ earthquake bombs into their bombing campaigns over Europe for the simple fact that their two primary heavy bombers, the B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator, were incapable of lifting such an enormous payload. Instead, the U.S. fought fire with fire by creating what they hoped would be their own version of Germany's V-weapon flying bombs. Banking on American ingenuity, imagination, and superior technology, unlike the Germans' V-1 buzz bomb, which was a robot weapon that flew to targets without human intervention, the U.S. Army Air Force created a radio-controlled flying bomb in the form of B-17s and B-24s packed with high explosives. Known as Weak Willies, the Americans' answer employed aging heavy bombers near the end of their serviceable life. Stripped of armor, seats, guns, and bomb racks in the interest of reducing weight, Weak Willies were then packed with boxes of up to 30,000 pounds of explosives, totaling 13 tons each. Controlled by radio signals from an accompanying heavy bomber, the controller flew the Torpex-loaded drone plane by the use of two television cameras fitted in the drone's cockpit, one aimed out the front cockpit window, a second aimed at the instrument console. Codenamed Operation Aphrodite, the missions were flown by the 562nd Bomb Squadron of the American 8th Air Force, based on the east coast of England, some 16 miles from Norwich. Since the technology of remote unmanned takeoffs didn't exist at the time, volunteer pilots and flight engineers were required to fly the drones to an altitude of 2,000 feet before switching on the autopilot and arming the explosive payload before bailing out of the plane, a critical glitch in the plan that, by any stretch of the imagination, exposed airmen to highly unacceptable risks. A glitch, in fact, that would repeatedly go disastrously wrong as Operation Aphrodite moved from concept to reality. The first mission was flown on August 4, 1944, against the Germans' emerging V-3 cannon project at Mimoyet, France, where German engineers were building a supergun capable of bombing London across the English Channel, using special multi-charge projectiles along the gun's inner barrel that hurled massive exploding bullets at unheard-of speeds. Had it been completed, it would have been capable of firing 600 rounds an hour into downtown London, 24 hours a day. Fortunately for Londoners, after the Allies' post-D-Day breakout from the Normandy bridgehead, the Nazis abandoned their V-3 site at Pas-de-Calais before continuing the weapon's development at a second site in Luxembourg. As for Operation Aphrodite's attempted takedown of the site at Mimoyet, the mission proved to be the first in a long line of failures. For when the drone pilot and flight engineers successfully bailed out of their B-17, the heavy bomber went into an uncontrollable spin and crashed. On the same day as the Mimoyet attempt, more drones were launched against a V-1 flying bomb bunker at Séricourt, France, followed by a second drone strike on the Germans' V-2 launch facility at Lake Apol. The first crashed into a forest in England, killing the pilot after he bailed out, while the second exploded at Orford in Sussex, obliterating 2 acres of British countryside and killing the engineer. On August 6th, 3 more drones were launched against Lake Apol, 2 falling harmlessly into the North Sea, while the third was shot down by a German anti-aircraft battery near Gravelines, France. As the death toll mounted, the U.S. Navy also began using Aphrodite drones in the form of modified PBYs and B-24 Liberators, leading to the most notable casualty during Aphrodite's short yet catastrophic existence. Of the 22 missions flown during Operation Aphrodite, a plane flown by Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. on August the 12th went horribly wrong. The son of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, not to mention brothers Jack, Robert, and Edward, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. of the 8th Air Force piloted his Fortress on a course bound for the U-boat pens at Heligoland, Germany. With 21,170 pounds of Torpex on board, just as Kennedy and co-pilot Wilford John Willey were about to bail out of the plane, two back-to-back explosions scattered human remains and plane parts over a 5-mile stretch of English countryside. 8 more missions would be flown through January 1st of 1945, but the missions were deemed largely unsuccessful because their targets were either overrun by Allied ground advances or taken out by conventional fighter attacks or strategic bombing missions. By the termination of Aphrodite on January 27th of 1945, none of the Americans flying bombs had managed to hit their assigned targets. Most fell by malfunctions, bad weather, premature detonation, and German anti-aircraft fire. By the close of Aphrodite, the U.S. Army Air Force had flown 14 failed missions along with 8 near-miss detonations, leaving tall boys and Grand Slam earthquake bombs as the only effective method of destroying German bunkers from the air, making Operation Aphrodite a failed and tragic program inspired by the desperation of war.